Well, welcome back, everybody. We're so excited. I've been really looking forward to talking about this with all of you. We'll be talking about the science of learning today, but I'm really wanting to hear from you, Heather. What have you been up to lately? What's going on at your house?
Oh, just, the regular. My kids just went back to school, and the other day my son lit a bagel on fire in the toaster. So my whole house smells like smoke. We're working on that. My other child gave me a flat tire and it ripped my shoe off my foot. And so my toes are all black and blue. Just regular parent stuff at my house. What about
Right?
you?
Yes. Yes. I'm sure you've heard of Murphy's Law. Have you heard of Murphy's Law? Yeah. So Dave and I were talking about this month, particularly. Dave's my husband, for those of you that are listening, that Murphy just has not stopped visiting us for months now. And we're like, this is like, if adulting was college courses, this is like adulting 501. It is like next level. We've replaced 3 AC units this month. And
Oh,
I'm just like, no one should be required to replace that many AC units in 1 year. But it's been, a journey. But on the fun side, it's getting better. Like we've been doing house projects and it gets me doing all my crafty things. But I was thinking about our students the other day because we're DIYing a lot of this, and I'm down on my hands and knees trying to cut this trim, and it's a lot of geometry, right? And I'm like starting to cry. It's more annoying than I want it to be, and it doesn't look quite right. And I'm thinking like, I'm a math person. I should be able to get this down. But I promise it's working out. It's looking good. It just took a little practice to get it going the way we wanted it to look. So lots of adventures over here for
nice.
sure. Well,
Yeah,
with that, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think it's healthy as an adult sometimes to try something new. Because when we're teaching kids, we're so used to knowing everything that we just forget how hard learning can be. So it's
Oh,
good to
totally.
try those new DIY projects and learn a new skill.
Right? Right? Lots of YouTube watching over here for hacks of how to do it and make it easier. So, with that, like let's jump into our topic. It's back to school time here in the US as of the time of this recording. This is a very buzzworthy word that we hear, and we were chatting before the call that we think it's really comical. And when people talk about the science of learning, it's all very general, and they expect you to go figure it out yourself instead of explicitly teaching you what the science of learning is. So our effort today is to more explicitly teach you what the science of learning is and how it can be applied in mathematics.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, I'm excited for this one because, like you said, it has been somewhat of a buzzword, and I always want people to be able to apply the actual science. I don't want them to just jump on a bandwagon just to do that. I want them to be able to know what they're talking about. The science of learning, in some ways, it can't be defined as a strict set of principles because this is going to be anything that we know or anything we learn in the future about how people learn, how the brain works. But we're going to pull in a couple main points that are often implied when people say science of learning. So, this first point, if you happen to be listening in, I'll describe the pictures. This is an MC Escher picture. It's one with the staircases, and the staircases go every which way. And there are people on the staircases, and they're also going every which way. And I would say that this picture for me reminds me of discovery learning. This is another buzzword, right? This idea that if kids are just, having fun and exploring, they'll figure it out. But as you can see in this picture, people are going all different directions. So if this was your classroom, kids may figure some things out, but they're not necessarily all figuring out the same thing. They're kind of going different directions. We don't know how fast they're getting there. Some of the images of people are just sitting around. Maybe they're kind of stuck. And so if we compare that with the second picture is just one staircase with one person going up the stairs. And if this was our classroom, all the kids would start and they may not start at the same point. Some kids might start a little further up the staircase, but we're all going the same direction. We're getting to the same place. We're going to be coming to the same conclusions. So that's one of the main points in science of learning, that we want to be systematic and explicit. We're going to help scaffold this for students so that we all get to the same place. And we don't want to just be doing loosey goosey discovery learning. Can kids invent their algorithms? That kind of thing. Those algorithms are taught for a reason. They are structured. They were developed over hundreds of years to get you to the points you need to be. They come up again in higher learning. If you invented your algorithms, then when you come to higher learning, your invented algorithms don't match the way the algorithm needs to be applied in these higher level concepts. And a lot of times, an elementary teacher might not be super strong in that upper level math, say high school or college level math, and they don't realize that they're setting kids up for failure because they've invented something that doesn't scale to higher level math. So we want to be systematic, we want to be explicit. The research backs this up time and time again, that this works for kids and it's particularly essential for struggling students. Another important concept relating to knowledge is the idea of background knowledge. Linking to background knowledge, like we talked about, can be helpful, but sometimes we also need to build that background knowledge. So here's an example that came directly from my daughter's coursework in high school. They had to do some math relating to the cross section of a gutter. And she did not know what a cross section meant, nor did she know what a gutter is, right? Like, she doesn't own a house. This isn't knowledge that all students have. Some students don't think about gutters because they don't own the house or they live in an apartment, right? They don't think about gutters. And so these are some things that we need to think about as teachers, building that math vocabulary, but also general vocabulary relating to story problems. We need to be linking to the prior concepts. And sometimes we have to build that background knowledge first. You can't link to it if it's not there. So we need to be checking to make sure those prior concepts are in place, they are remembered and understood. And then math facts are another important part of that when we're talking about the science of learning and math. Knowing those math facts in your long-term memory can be something that reduces the load on working memory. And you can use those and connect those in what you're learning without it being another piece that overloads your working memory because you're trying to figure out the math fact with strategies. And that would be a whole other episode to talk about math facts, which we do have some episodes coming out on that. So I'll save that for another day, but just know that that is an important piece of background knowledge in math. One of the next things we talk a lot about in science of learning is working memory. So, Adrianne, I'm going to use you as my guinea pig. I have
Okay.
10 animals. I'm going to read them off for listeners. And then I'm going to have just a couple seconds for you to try to memorize as many as you can. So, we have a rhino, a fox, a crab, a bear, an elephant, a squirrel, a buffalo, a turtle, a giraffe, and a stingray. I'm going to take them away in a couple seconds. Okay. Now they're gone. So let's see, Adrianne, how many can you remember?
Okay. A stingray, a giraffe, a buffalo, a squirrel, a turtle, a fox. I can't think of the rest.
That's okay. That's okay. Because you
Yeah.
made it farther than kind of the average for working memory, actually. So for working memory, the average is about 3 to 4 pieces of
Yeah.
information you can keep. I find when I do this with adults, especially educators, we've naturally kind of learned some strategies for retaining information. And these are small pieces of information. So I do find adults usually get 6 or 7. It's about the length of a phone number. It makes sense the way
Yeah.
phone
Right.
numbers are about 7 digits, and we've usually chunked it in 2 sections. Um, but if this was more complex pieces of information, or if this was kids, they'd be more likely to get 3 or 4. If it was struggling students who don't have strong working memory, they might only get 1 or 2.
Hmm.
This is important for us to think about when we're teaching a whole new math algorithm. If we teach an algorithm that has 7 steps, That's one of the reasons that kids can't remember the steps or they mix up the order. We have overloaded working memory. So this is really a huge part of science of learning. I'm going to show you again the animals just so you can see which ones you missed. So we had crab, turtle, stingray, squirrel, bear, giraffe, elephant, rhino, buffalo, and fox.
I mean, I did pretty good. I
Good
will
for
say the strategy I was kind of using is I remembered the last ones, right? And it was kind of
yes.
going visually in my mind across the screen. And then once I got down to the bottom, I couldn't remember.
Yeah, so
So,
you made a system to
yeah,
kind
I
of
did.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. That's pretty common. A lot of people will remember the most recent things because your working memory only holds things for about 1 or 2 seconds, unless you do something to keep it there, like rehearse it, which adults usually do. Kids may not naturally do that.
Yeah.
And so the last ones are often the ones that people recall.
I think another really great example for adults that they could probably recall if you've ever played bunco in a group and you're playing with the dice and you're trying to chat at the same time as you're adding your groups, it is extremely difficult, right? And you'll
Yes.
notice that there's people at your table that are better at it than others, and that's because of their working memory capacity, right? And
Yeah.
so my friends when I play bunco, they know like, okay, shh, leave Adrienne alone. She's adding, right? Or or if I'm sitting next to a really strong one, she'll do the adding while I'm talking. Like it's really difficult to juggle that many processes all at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. And some kids, when I did this with my daughter, she had a strategy. She was going to memorize all the gray ones versus all the colorful ones. So
Oh, I
sometimes
like that.
strategies like that, we'll talk about that in some of the future steps. But young kids often don't have those strategies. Struggling students often don't have those strategies yet. One of the things we want to do when we teach new information to help it leave working memory and get it into long term memory is to activate prior knowledge. So, this image comes from Dylan Kane, who did a really great Substack on this topic. And if you teach something new and link it to something else, then the brain kind of knows where to file it. That can help it get into at least short term memory and not just be sitting in working memory. Marilyn Zecker will say, how many groups of blank can I make out of blank when you're teaching division with whole numbers? We can link that later when we do division with fractions. How many groups of 1/4 can I make out of 3/4? Right. And so linking that can help the brain know, okay, this, I know where it goes. I know what to link it to. I know this is important because it connects to other things that are important for me to remember. Okay, like we talked about with the animals, one thing we can do is chunk them for our students. They may not naturally do this, so we could teach in chunks. So, for example, I could have said, okay, memorize the sea animals. The sea animals are the stingray, the crab, and the turtle. Memorize the African animals. There's 4 of those. There's the rhino, the elephant, the buffalo, and the giraffe. And of course, with students, we wouldn't do all these chunks at once. I'm just giving you examples. It might be one chunk one day, one chunk the next day, right? Then we could do forest animals. Memorize the forest animals: the bear, the fox, and the squirrel. So by chunking it that way, so I'm only giving you 3 or 4 animals at once, you would be more likely to remember when I ask you to recall that later. So let's try that now with retrieval practice, which we already did once today. Retrieval practice is when you try, it was basically quizzing. You try to remember something that you were told. And so go ahead and say the animals you remember now. I'm going to put you on the spot again, Adrienne.
Oh boy. Okay. So I'll just mention too that when you were talking about the categories, I was thinking of their environments. So for the forest animals, I remember a bear and a fox and it's a squirrel. Okay. Then the sea animals, I remember the stingray, the turtle, and crab. Then the African animals, the giraffe, the buffalo, and it's escaping me. No, I'm like making up words in my brain that I know are not on there. That's as many as I can remember.
That's okay. You increased from last time, so you're at 8 this time. So when I do this activity, usually we've increased a little bit more. We can remember a few more animals instead of 3 to 4 or 6 or 7 with people who have good strategies for supporting their working memory. Now, usually we're closer to 7 or 8 of the animals. We're getting closer to remembering all of them. Each time that I tell you to retrieve these animals again, you're basically telling the brain, hey, this is actually important to remember. It's going to come up again. And so it helps the brain really push that into your short term or long term memory because it's seeing each time that you retrieve this, oh, this is important. It's also helping students be more comfortable. Every time they do retrieve it, they're starting to learn, okay, actually, now I can retrieve the information. But at first, they might not remember the information. And for some students or teachers, they might think, oh, that's bad. Either the students might think I can't learn, or the teacher might think, oh, I haven't taught it well because it wasn't automatically retrieved this first or second time. So one of the things we need to teach students is that kind of quizzing for retrieval practice is what's helping the brain learn that it does need to remember this information in the future. So forgetting that once or twice, that's fine. That's okay. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was never learned or that you can't learn it or it wasn't taught well. It's just helping the brain learn, okay, I'm going to need this information later on. The more that you can do this low stakes quizzing, it doesn't have to be graded. The more you can do this leading up to a test, by the time a kid gets to a test, it will actually reduce the anxiety because when they get to that test, they can think of examples previously where they could retrieve the information. If the test is the first point you have to retrieve it without any cues, that's really panic inducing because you might not know if you can do it or not. So that quizzing is really important for students. That can be a myth that quizzing is something that is inducing anxiety in our students. And the research really doesn't back that up. It shows that when you have that low stakes quizzing and retrieval practice, and it's often, it reduces the test anxiety. If students are struggling with retrieval practice, then you may need to do some other strategies in addition. You might need to do more chunking. You might need to go look and see, are there gaps in prior knowledge that we need to go back and fill that background knowledge so they're ready for this topic? Do we need to add more retrieval practice? Maybe we just haven't done enough of it. Think like you're in marketing as well. Sometimes adding a jingle or an acronym. Maybe there's an image that can be easily retrieved, like a logo, right? Maybe you can make it a rhyme or add retrieval cues. So, like if I sing, for example, ba da ba ba ba, automatically people think I'm loving it, right? Because this is something they've heard before, right? This built-in retrieval cue. So think like a marketer if you have students who are really struggling with that retrieval. So we can go over them again. So sea animals, you've got all of those. African animals, I think these were the ones we missed. You
Oh
got
yeah, the two big ones, the rhino
these,
and the
I think you
elephant.
got the giraffe and the buffalo.
Yeah, yeah,
Elephant and rhino. Yeah, the biggest ones. But see, that's something your
yeah.
brain can be like, oh, I forgot the big
Right.
ones last time. Next time I'm going to remember those. And then you got the forest animals. Okay, so the next piece that I want you to think about when you're thinking about science of learning is dual coding. And we had a whole episode talking about this with Nidhi Sakdeva on the podcast earlier. So if you haven't heard that, that would be a great one to go back and listen. But the idea of this is that your brain can process two streams of information at the same time if those two streams are on a related topic. So, for example, your brain can process images and it can also process verbal information. And so that's one of the reasons why when we present things to students or even to adults, we try not to have slides that are full of just paragraphs of information because then people are trying to read verbal information, but they're also trying to listen to it. So when we do that to our students or people that we're presenting to, they can't process both of those verbal pieces of information and they're going to tune one of them out. And so usually they're going to ignore what you're saying and they're going to read the slides or things like that, right? So instead, we want to make sure those are aligned. If I've got pictures on my screen, I try not to have too many words because I'm talking to you. If you're handing students a worksheet that has written directions, you should either read the directions and then hand out the worksheet, or hand out the worksheet, pause while they take time to read it, and then give your discussion about the worksheet so that those two aren't being processed at the same time. This is what you were talking about with Bunko, Adrianne, that when you're trying to do math and you're talking through the math to yourself, right? So you're doing a verbal process and other people are talking to you, you can't process both at the same time.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel very validated.
Yes. So some of the people who are really good at that are probably actually just really good at trying to just tune out the outside noise and just
For
focus on,
sure. What do you bet if I
right?
asked that person what I was talking about, they probably wouldn't be able to tell you because they were focused on
Exactly.
the math.
Yes, yes, exactly. The other way that this can apply is sometimes in our classrooms, the visual piece can be a problem. If we have classrooms that are really busy with lots of decorations, even sometimes learning posters, the posters might actually just be distracting from what you're trying to show in class. So we really want to think about the decorations in our classrooms, make sure that they're not really the traditional bright and colorful type of thing that we seem to think that kindergartners especially want, right? Like, oh, let's make school fun. But actually, we might be making it harder for them to learn. And the research shows kids learn better if you make your decorations a little bit more minimal, not so colorful and distracting. This also happens in textbooks sometimes that they want to make the textbook, like the worksheet, fun. And so they'll put in characters or things that really don't have anything to do with the math at all, and it turns out that those are just distracting from the content. So the research shows it'd be better to leave those out unless they're actually focusing, if the characters are, doing the math or something like that, right? If we're going to use color, we want it to be highlighting a point in the equation, maybe, right? We don't want to just use color just because it would be fun to color code in all different colors. So those are really important for us to think about, this dual coding theory. Sometimes it's a problem in notes that has been worked step by step and you can refer back to it. This has a great research backing. Or it could be a task analysis, which is similar, but you're telling students the steps in solving a problem. And we like to do that with little picture images as well. So if you're watching the video, there's a little example that has some picture images showing the steps in solving a problem with addition, with regrouping. And so that can reduce the load on working memory and give something that students can refer back to. Over time, you can fade those prompts out too with some retrieval practice, right? Instead of providing the prompts, you can pause and say, can you draw those buttons? We call them buttons because we like to touch to track each step. Can you draw your buttons to keep track of the steps? And then once they've tried, we refer and look back and see if they remembered them, right? This can help them internalize the steps and get them in the right order. And it can also help keep track of which part of the task is easy or difficult. Is there a certain part of this task that's tricky that we need to practice? Interleaving is another concept in the science of learning. This is the idea of going back and forth between two different but similar things, like compare and contrast. So we could compare all the gray animals, for example, in our set of animals. If we go back to those from earlier, these were all the animals that were gray. We could have some discussion about it. Are there more of any certain type? Well, let's see. I do see a lot of the African animals here. Are they all African animals? No, I can see we do have a stingray and a bear. Is there any type that's not represented? Let's see, we've got ocean, forest. No, I think we've got all the types. Okay, let's look at the colorful now. Let's compare this other set. So they're related that they're still animals, but they're different in terms of how we're grouping them. So with the colorful ones, we could say, were there more of the gray animals or more of the colorful animals? It was pretty close, but there's one extra colorful animal. So a math application could be, for example, if we just do addition story problems with students, we're just doing like part whole story problems. Every single one is part whole. And we just stay with that. The whole worksheet, every worksheet all week. That's what we're focusing on. Well, the problem is at some point kids learn to just look at the numbers and they'll just always add the numbers. They're not looking at the story anymore. So by interleaving and having some different schemas in there, that helps kids start to differentiate what's important to pay attention to, right? Because now suddenly the words in the story become much more important. Without them, I can't pick a schema and then I can't pick an equation to help me solve it. So interleaving is helping to make sure that I understand the info, I can differentiate between those two types, and I can apply it to these story problems. This also happens, I feel like, with math facts. We often practice, let's do all the addition facts. Okay, later we're going to come back and do all the subtraction facts. And then when kids start doing those, we call them careless mistakes, right? They they just add all of them when we do finally interleave. And we tell parents like, oh, they're making careless mistakes. They need to pay attention. Well, actually, they did pay attention. We didn't do enough interleaving. And so we taught them that it was fine to ignore the sign. So this is one of the important reasons why we interleave, because interleaving really helps kids fine tune what are the important parts of this information to pay attention to. Otherwise, they might be ignoring some really important pieces like the sign. So this is really something we need to own. If we want them to pay attention to the sign, we have to interleave in such a way that it is important to pay attention to the sign. The next thing I wanted to talk about in the science of learning is the learning hierarchy. And you can find some great information about this on Intervention Central. So, this first level is called acquisition. This is when you're just beginning to learn a skill. So, the skill is not yet reliable and accurate. So, for example, maybe let's say you're learning how to add for the first time. You would exit this stage when you get to the point that you are accurate with adding with little adult support, right? And so when you're done with that, you would move on and begin to work on fluency. So already here's where something can go wrong in education. Sometimes we just stop at acquisition. We're in our classroom, we can see, all right, I'm up here, kids are doing it with me, they seem to understand it. And instead, we just go to a new topic and we leave this one alone until we come up to our next standardized test. Well, by that time, it's gone and it didn't make it to long term memory, it didn't get fluent. And so we need to make sure after we teach it, we need to continue it enough in our warm up or our wrap up that we can develop fluency with it. That the skill can actually be used and applied to other things because it's not taking up so much working memory, right? Part of this is getting it more into short term or long term memory so it can be really fluent. Um, so this is at the beginning of this stage. This is when kids are accurate, but they're slow. They know how to find the answers, maybe, but if this was math facts, for example, maybe they know how to get an answer, but they don't know how to do it in just 1 or 2 seconds, right? So they would exit when they can do the skill. It's retained. It's really easily retrieved. They don't have to stop and think about it. Kind of like with the animals earlier. You got some animals, but maybe we weren't fluent yet, right? Like you had to stop and pause and really think about it and talk through it. So you hadn't made it out of that fluency stage yet for those animals. We know that they're ready to move on when this skill is really fluent and they're ready to apply it to something else. In fact, actually, I'm going to back up a little bit. This is another point that sometimes things go wrong in the learning hierarchy. We see this a lot of times with kids who have learning differences and they're trying to learn their math facts. Sometimes for these kids, they were not done with acquisition before they get thrown into fluency. And so, a sign of this might be we're drilling math facts and their scores are not improving, right? That tells us something has gone wrong. We need to go back and check. And Brian Ponte is going to come talk all about this in Math Facts because he's one of our great researchers who focuses on this topic. So he'll be coming up in a future episode. But that's one of the things he talks about is how to know when a kid is ready for the fluency on that specific skill.
Yeah, that's going to be a fantastic episode. I'm so excited.
Yeah, yeah, me too. So some of our kids that have been burned by what gets called drill and kill, it's not necessarily that doing fluency activities was bad for them. In fact, the research does support that fluency activities help our students, they help our struggling students learn, but they do need to be ready. So if they're not progressing on fluency, please don't keep drilling a kid in the same way, because instead you're teaching them that they can't learn, which is not true. It's that the way it's being presented is too much. So maybe we need to go back to more chunking, like we talked about earlier. Maybe we have too many facts. Maybe they were still in the acquisition phase. There are other things that we need to look at if they're not making progress in this fluency stage. So the next stage is generalization. This is when students are accurate and fluent, but they might still confuse a skill with similar skills. So remember, we talked about interleaving, right? This is a great place for interleaving so that kids can really help differentiate, when do I apply this skill? When do I maybe apply some other skill? So, an example might be they know their math facts, and then you try to do double digit multiplication, and the kids act like they don't know the math facts anymore, and they start just counting by five instead of knowing 5 times 3, right? So, generalization is important. One of the things that we do in this stage is we focus on a specific set of facts and use those in the lesson. So that when we get to double digit multiplication, we can say, oh, hey, I know that fact. We practiced that in the warm up, right? When we did our fluency in the warm up. And we can help kids with that generalization piece. Another piece that, with generalization can be when kids don't transfer the skill across different settings and situations. Like maybe they can multiply when they see it in a horizontal form, but we have to help them generalize if it's written in a vertical form, that they actually know it. I've had this happen with kids. This particularly can happen with autistic kids who maybe are so focused on seeing it a certain way, they're a little bit too black and white about it and not transferring it. So the kid might know the math facts in the warm up, and then you go to the lesson and they say, I've never seen that before because it was written, a different form, horizontal instead of vertical. So that's part of generalization, helping kids really start to see where the skill applies, when to apply it, when to not apply it. And then the last stage of the learning hierarchy is adaptation. This is when students are fluent and accurate. They can use the skill in new settings. They can use it at school, they can use it at home. They don't need a lot of prompting, but they still might be really rigid about using the skill in the same way and in all situations. So, an example of this could be that a student knows how to use and apply the algorithm for addition, but maybe they're not adjusting when mental math would have been much easier. They're not looking at the numbers and saying, oh, I'm only adding 100. I don't need to sit down and do a whole algorithm for that. I can actually quickly reason through that. And they have the ability to do that mental math, but if they're not really fully adapting that skill, they might just really rigidly go to the algorithm and not think about it. But there's really no exit for this. You're just continuously working on that adaptation of knowing when to use the skill or not, applying it to higher level skills that come up in future math, things like that. So, this is the learning hierarchy, and it's really important for us to think about, because sometimes if kids are stuck, it's because we're trying to behave in a different part of the hierarchy than that kid is ready for. All right, well, now let's go back to another concept that relates to our animals. It's called spaced practice. So I intentionally spaced it after something else. In your classroom, you would be doing spacing ideally a little bit longer. It could be spacing within a lesson. It could be practice math facts at the beginning, do a little lesson, and oh, can you still remember them at the end? That could be spaced practice. But it could also be, okay, I think the kid has really mastered this. They've gotten really fluent with this. I'm going to put it aside for a day and then see, can they remember it that following day? Right? Or I'm going to put it aside for a week and come back after a week. Is it still there? And we start spacing out that spacing more and more and retrieving it again. This helps the brain know, I don't just need this in my short term memory for a situation that I've encountered and will never encounter again. I'm going to need this in long term. This is just a part of life. It's going to come up over and over and over. That's what we're telling the brain. So let's see if you can remember any of the animals now that we did a whole other activity and then came back. Put you on the spot again, Adrian.
Okay, here we go. Okay, I'm actually going to attack African ones because I know I was struggling with those first. The buffalo and the giraffe, the elephant, and the rhino. Um,
Yeah.
so I remember that because big ones, right? Okay,
Yeah.
then forest animals was the fox, the bear, and the squirrel. And then the sea animals, the stingray, the crab, and the turtle.
Yay! Okay, so notice that the ones that you forgot were the ones that you actually pulled up and retrieved towards the beginning. So forgetting was okay. It taught you that this is going to come up again, told the brain this is important. And so sometimes when kids forget things, they think, oh, I failed, or the teacher thinks they failed, right? But it's not that those animals were completely forgotten. When we showed them again, you said, oh, yeah, I remember those animals, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so they were still retrievable. If we take so long in our space practice that when you do it again, kids look at you like deer in headlights, they seem like they've never seen it before, then you've either gone too far in your space practice or it never even got in working memory, or it never got in short-term memory or long-term memory to begin with because you
right.
overloaded working memory. When I do this with groups, by this point, people are usually remembering 8 or 9, maybe 10. Some people are at 10, right? Students might be struggling a little bit more if we have struggling students who are struggling to get information to working memory, right? They might not have as many. So this space practice is important. We're bringing it up again after a space of time. Again, we're showing the brain this is important. We need to know about this. Ideally, this would be a space of more than just, talking about another topic and coming back, but I don't necessarily have you next week for class. So um, this was just our example to space and bring it up at the end. So it can be short spacing. You can teach something at the beginning of class and then pull it back up in your wrap up at the end as an exit ticket. Or it might be spacing, oh, okay, I'm going to see if you still remember tomorrow. I'm going to see if you remember next week. 1 month later can be a good sweet spot when students have first mastered something. About a month later, bring it back up and see if they still know it. And then 2 months again after that. That can be a really sweet spot for space practice.
I have a question about that really quick. So
Yeah.
I think some listeners might be wondering, where would space practice fit in the hierarchy of learning there? Is it in the acquisition and fluency phase? Like it's kind of can juggle between the two? What's your opinion, Heather?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if I've thought about it in those terms, but when you're first acquiring a skill, I would really make sure you actually finish acquiring it. I wouldn't jump so soon that they kind of hadn't acquired it yet. It was all still muddled together, right? Because they really need to make sense of it enough that then when you bring it back up, they had made sense of it to begin with, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, with fluency, I think that applies a lot because you start to get math facts that are memorized.
Mhm.
And so we do want to start spacing out how often. They've got it to a point where if you do it every day, they know it, but then you've got to start spreading it out. Like, can we make the gap longer? Maybe it's 2 days, then it's 3 days, then it's right. And we're stretching it out because we need that spacing also to make sure that it sticks long term. So I think that's where it really applies. But in the other two levels as well, math is something where like the topic comes up again and again, you're continually adapting it. So some of that spacing will happen naturally as you generalize and adapt to new skills. Um, so it isn't necessarily that space practice only applies in one level of the
Yeah.
hierarchy. It's a good
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. I liked how you were mapping it. And so I thought I'd ask it.
Yeah. So here are the animals again for those who are listening. We have the stingray, the rhino, the giraffe, the fox, the turtle, the elephant, the buffalo, the crab, the squirrel, and the bear. So you got all the animals as we did all these different
Woohoo!
strategies from science of learning. We helped your brain know that you were going to get asked again and again. And it might be a little embarrassing, so you had to remember it.
Yes.
No, hopefully in the classroom, we're not making kids feel like they're embarrassed.
Yeah, we don't want to embarrass
As
kids.
adults.
No.
But yeah, 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 yeah. And kids can learn over time too that quizzing actually is going to help them. So sometimes we're worried about kids feeling bad when we quiz them and they don't remember something. And so we say, okay, I'm going to try not to quiz very often. And actually, we're making that harder for kids because quizzing more often is what's going to help that information get into long term memory. It's going to make it more easily retrievable. So then by the time you get to the test, the kids are going to feel confident because they know I was able to retrieve that on these most recent quizzes. Maybe not the first quizzes, but on the most recent ones. Right. And so instead, we need to quiz more often if the kids are having some of that test anxiety so that they know when they get to the test that counts, they know it's going to be retrievable. And
Mhm.
quizzing doesn't have to be a graded thing. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. It can just be a back and forth thing like we did today. I didn't grade you on these animals. I just
No, you
asked,
didn't.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
so
think
what
what's awesome about everything we've talked about so far is this isn't just for kids. This is for anyone,
yeah.
any person, any age learning, right? I was thinking about the hierarchy that you had about acquisition and then to fluency, generalization, and so forth. If
Yeah.
we applied that to learning to go to the gym, right? Like you're acquiring the habit. That is the hardest part, right? So think
Yeah.
about it that way, comparing it to kids learning math facts. It is so hard at the beginning to get
Yes.
that habit going and then turning it into fluency, right? Like when anytime I set out onto a health kick of some sort, that fluency step is difficult too, but then it gets easier over time.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, this is not just for math, it's not just for students, it's for everyone. Um, so that's the last of the pieces that I brought today for pieces that we often talk about when we're talking about science of learning. Obviously, there are going to be more things and we'll learn more in the future. But those are some of the main points when people ask you, does science of learning get applied in this situation? Those are some of the things they're really looking for that you should have as just a basis for any content area in life. Like you mentioned, adults, kids, any topic. Those things need to be present. And then we layer those on with our more specific science of math types of research.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And if you're interested in seeing more of this in practice, I just want to invite our listeners to come check out the CRA Club because that's what we've created. We created the resources, what we needed to support our own working memory to make sure we're doing science of learning appropriately for students. And so that's what we've done. We've opened the vault. You have access to everything our team uses, and it's continually growing as we take stuff from our drive and then adjust it so someone else can use it. It's super affordable. It's $47 a month as of this recording. And I just to toot our own horn here, I'm really excited. Like we hit 56 members today and our goal this year is 200. And the reason why we get so excited about that is that means more students are getting access to this amazing instruction, science of learning. We're really passionate about it. We want to have a bigger impact in the field of education. So the CRA Club is one of the ways that we do that. And you would get to have coaching calls with Heather and I where we talk about topics like this, where if you had questions about the science of learning, you wanted more explicit instruction from us on interleaving, you could get that through the CRA Club by bringing your questions. We right now offer it twice a month where you can come to a live call, but otherwise you get access to all of those materials. So be sure to check out the show notes so you can see how to join the CRA Club. And Heather, is there any other parting words you want to share before we go?
Oh, just that I'm so excited about this club. We have repeatedly been told there is so much in here. How do you have so much in here for the price that you have it at? This is everything you could possibly need. And so I think I just want to say, yeah, that's really our goal is we need to make this math movement happen, right?
Mhm.
Reading had its movement and just people are not talking about math. Math is getting left behind. And so we have tried as much as we can to put everything in there, make it as cheap as we possibly can so that people can be using it. We can have a community together. We can have a movement And we just have so much fun together and learning and applying.
It's a really fun group, and we are nerds. I will say, at the last call, we chuckled that how much we enjoyed just nerding out about math together. But it's awesome because you get to celebrate. Like, hey, we had a member yesterday tell us, like, I had a student that was stuck, so stuck on division, and I used your guys' materials, and she picked it up like that, just grabbed on and was like, I right? And so it's just so exciting and rewarding for us to hear that and for her to have that win with her student. And now that student's walking around a little taller today because she mastered something that just was not clicking. So, anyways, we hope to see you in the CRA club. It's a great place to be. And again, our goal is to keep it super affordable. So you're not going to see it go on sale. It's as low as we could make it, and so, don't fret about that or wait for a sale. That's just not going to be a thing with us. But we would love to have you there and come to experience it. All right. Well, make sure to join us again in the future. We've got some big names coming up. Brian Ponce's coming. Lorraine Hightower, an advocate that works for students, helping families fight for services. She's going to be sharing awesome tips like things about how to do some of the advocacy yourself as a parent for your student, but also what does it look like to hire an advocate to work for you. It's going to be some really fantastic stuff. We've also got some things slated with, is it Jump Math, I think?
Yeah, John Mighton of
That
Jumpman.
John Math. Yeah,
Yeah.
yep. It's gonna
Yep,
be
and Amanda
awesome.
Vanderheyden. Yeah, Amanda
Yes.
Vanderheyden of Spring Math, because they're putting together kind of a collaboration. So I'm
Yes.
really stoked to have this conversation with them.
It's gonna be really great, and I get chills anytime I think about it. Like, these are just amazing people. We're so grateful that they say yes to meeting with us and sharing their knowledge, and so make sure to keep in touch, subscribe on our channels, be on our email list so you don't miss out when those episodes hit. All right, thanks. We'll see you again.